Zhang says Hong Kong may have to pay a heavy price because of the non-cooperation campaign. 2 New York police officers die after being shot execution style. And Raul Castro asked the U.S. to respect communist rule in Cuba.
Evening. The Financial Secretary has warned of the heavy price Hong Kong may have to pay if the non-cooperation campaign sparked by the political reform controversy impedes the government's handling of other pressing problems. Meanwhile, an economic researcher has told people not to expect many sweeteners in the government's next budget, given that a housing reserve has now been set up to help implement the long-term housing strategy. In the wake of the civil disobedience movement, the struggle for what some call genuine universal suffrage continues. Earlier on, the Federation of Students and a coalition of 20 advocacy groups called on Hong Kong people to participate in a non-cooperation movement by using multiple checks to pay their salaries tax to increase the government's workload, among other things. The pan-democratic lawmakers have also started their own non-cooperation campaign. Today, Financial Secretary Zhang slammed such actions on his blog. He said apart from causing disturbances to the government, there is a heavy price that Hong Kong may have to bear because of these actions. Zhang said the community has been highly focused on the political reform issue. However, one must not forget the city still has other important issues to deal with, such as housing, land supply, healthcare, and waste problems. He said these issues shouldn't be sacrificed amid the political reform controversy. Even if community can't reach a consensus over political reform, people shouldn't let their sentiment affect improvements on other social issues. The Financial Secretary also talked about the $27 billion housing reserve recently set up to meet the public housing supply target for the next 10 years. He says should there be no major unexpected events, the government is likely to see a yearly budget surplus during the remainder of his term of office. However, because of the money put into the housing reserve to implement the city's long-term housing strategy, an economist says people shouldn't expect many sweeteners in the upcoming budget.
Every time it comes to the budget year, when the FS announce the budget, people expect the FS to give money or to give out some kind of one-off policy. And as we know that Hong Kong society is aging, okay, and we're going to have a lot of problems to deal with the aging problems, such as the public outlays in terms of health, in terms of housing.
Some insist the government has to take into consideration the poor and the elderly's needs in its next budget.
Secretary for Transport and Housing Anthony Leung says the government will increase housing supply to try to address the problem of subdivided flats. And as for the government's newly announced housing reserve, Leung says the amount and time it will need the money depends on next year's financial forecast of the Housing Authority. Ronnie Samtani has more.
The number of subdivided flats in Hong Kong has gone up to over 86,000. Speaking to TVB News today, Secretary for Transport and Housing Anthony Leung stressed that for the long-term housing strategy, the government will focus on land supply to improve the situation.
Personally, I'm not happy with the existing situation of the proliferation of subdivided units. But when it comes to solving the problem, at the end of the day, I think it's a supply issue. Because some of the SDU subdivided unit tenants, they have nowhere to go to, and therefore they have to live there. But in the meanwhile, we don't have the luxury of, say, eliminating all the subdivided units because you have nowhere to rehouse these people.
He added that the government will also work to eradicate illegal subdivided units in industrial buildings and make sure that subdivided units in residential buildings are in compliance with the buildings ordinance. Construction costs for building one unit has risen to more than $1 million. To help the Housing Authority reach its 10-year goal to develop 290,000 public housing units, the government recently announced the establishment of a housing reserve.
At the moment, indeed, the Housing Authority has a handsome surplus, but that surplus will be drawn down in the next few years as we build more public housing, as we build more housing for sale. There are many factors that will determine how much money from this housing reserve that the Housing Authority might need in the future. Building costs, whether the exact number of units that we are going to build in particular years, and that of course depends on how quickly land will be made available.
Leung said there are many factors that will affect the timing and scale of injection of money by the government into the Housing Authority. He said the Housing Authority will soon publish its next financial forecast. Ronnie Samtani, TVB News.
Investigators are exploring the possibility that 2 New York City police officers who were shot execution-style Saturday were the victims of a revenge attack. The city's police commissioner says the officers were quite simply assassinated. James Aiken reports.
The officers were shot at close range as they sat in their squad car in a Brooklyn neighborhood.
The suspect, who has been identified as 28-year-old Ismail Brinsley, walked up to the police car. He took a shooting stance on the passenger side and fired his weapon several times through the front passenger window, striking both officers in the head.
Yeah, I hear the shots because we live like here, and it was like 4 shots or 5 maybe, I don't remember.
And what did you think about it?
I was like, oh my God, what was happening?
Police say Brinsley then ran inside a subway station where he fatally shot himself in the head. The victims have been identified as 32-year-old Liu Wenjin and 40-year-old Rafael Ramos. New York's mayor says the execution shootings are a particularly despicable act,
Which goes at the very heart of our society and our democracy. When a police officer is murdered, it tears at the foundation of our society. It is an attack on all of us.
Earlier in the day, police say Brinsley, who had a lengthy criminal record, went to the Baltimore home of an ex-girlfriend and shot and wounded her. Police there say they noticed Brinsley posting to the woman's Instagram account, threatening New York officers in retaliation for the police chokehold death of Eric Garner. Police have been criticized for their tactics on the unarmed black man who was stopped by officers on suspicion of selling untaxed cigarettes. New York City police received warnings from Baltimore officials around the time of the shootings in Brooklyn.
When these funerals are over, those responsible will be called on the carpet and held accountable. This was a cold-blooded assassination like we haven't seen before.
If the killings do turn out to have been motivated by the death of Eric Garner, they could further inflame tensions across the United States over race and law enforcement. James Aiken, TVB News.
French police have shot dead a man who stabbed and wounded 3 officers in a police station. Police say the man attacked the officers in a suburb of the city of Tours in central France. France's interior minister says the suspect shouted "God is the greatest" in Arabic as he attacked the officers. Counter-terrorism investigators are probing the incident to determine if the man was acting alone or on orders. Police say the suspect was known to them, but was not known for terrorist activities. The 3 wounded officers are recovering in hospital. An Australian woman has been charged with murder in connection of the deaths of 8 children in Cairns on Friday. 7 of the victims were her own kids. The 8th was her niece.
She has appeared in a bedside court hearing this morning around lunchtime, and she's been remanded in custody. She's conscious, she's speaking, and quite lucid.
Grieving relatives and friends paid tribute to the 8 victims today. The 37-year-old suspect is recovering from stab wounds in hospital. She's been charged with 8 counts of murder. It's still not clear yet how the children died. They were Torres Strait Islanders, a group of Indigenous Australians considered distinct from the broader Aboriginal community due to their origins on islands off the Queensland coast.
Cuban President Raul Castro is demanding the United States respect communist rule on the island. He's also warned that Cuban-American exiles may try to sabotage efforts to normalize ties between the two countries. Here's Jameson Wong.
Don't expect détente to do away with our communist system. That's Raul Castro's blunt message to the U.S. just days after the two countries announced they're working towards restoring ties that were strained for decades. In his speech at the National Assembly, the Cuban president said he's open to discussing a wide range of issues with Washington, but he insisted the island nation would not give up its socialist principles. In the same way we've never demanded that the U.S. change its political system, we demand respect for ours. And he said his country faces a long and difficult struggle before the U.S. would remove its decades-old embargo due to opposition from Cuban-American exiles. Castro did praise his American counterpart for trying to normalize relations and confirmed that he'll attend the Summit of the Americas in Panama in April, potentially setting up a face-to-face meeting with U.S. President Barack Obama. Towards the end of the speech, he paid tribute to his elder brother and former Cuban leader. Long live Fidel, the fatherland or death. 88-year-old Fidel Castro has been absent from the historic events in recent days. In fact, he has not been seen in public for almost a year now, and that sparked fresh concerns about his health. These Cuban-American exiles took aim at him and Obama. Anti-Castro protesters rallied in Miami, calling the U.S. president a traitor and denouncing him for trying to normalize ties with the communist regime. They said the Obama administration should not be talking or granting concessions to governments that haven't earned them. The demonstrators promised to fight for the freedom of the Cuban people. Jameson Wong, TVB News.
The United States is asking China for help over alleged North Korean cyber attacks on Sony, sparked by a controversial movie. A war of words between Washington and Pyongyang is heating up, with North Korea denying involvement and warning of serious consequences if the U.S. refuses to take part in a joint investigation into the hacking attack. The White House, meanwhile, is standing by the FBI's conclusion that Pyongyang was responsible. It's not immediately clear what role China will play in the controversy involving the interview.
And still to come in our news. Walter Kwok says he won't return to Sun Hung Kai Properties following the trial of his 2 brothers and Raphael Hui. Robotic arms that can be controlled by thoughts. And a monkey saves another from dying in India.
From the day we are born, our body clock controls our lives.
It's like your watch. Without a battery, it keeps ticking and ticking.
Impossible as it is to believe, they're the ones who are taking the decisions for us.
Monday night, Well-Being. Terry Wogan's Time of Your Life at 9:30 on Pearl.
飛利浦 Sonicare 特有專利聲波科技，釋出嘅液體清潔動力能深入罅隙，潔齒更徹底。飛利浦 Sonicare 聲波震動牙刷。
Innovation and you, Philips。
屋企太多嘢冇位放，想揾個空間放珍藏。儲存易幫到你，空間實用，設施齊全，位置方便，24小時服務熱線82020811，仲有新分店開張添嘅。
Introducing Turbo Down from Columbia Sportswear. With its Omni-Heat reflective lining, it's ultralight and super warm. Turbo Down, unleash the power of warmth. Columbia.
This is the new iPhone 6.
And this is the new iPhone 6 Plus.
The camera has been utterly